I'm Dan Miller.
I'm Kevin Stern. At Miller Stern Lawyers, we are honored to serve the community that we love. We work for you.
For over a decade, we've spent our days and nights fighting for you. We believe in justice. We believe in fighting for what's right.
That's why we are proud to sponsor a community conversation to make a better Baltimore.
It takes guts to stand up for justice and accountability and demand better.
And we can do it by giving you a voice in your future.
At Miller Stern, we're fighting for a better Baltimore.
Baltimore, Charm City, neighborhoods full of history, great people, and lots of potential. A city trying to clean up its act after years of decay. A place where children should be safe to play on clean streets. But the pockets of problems are growing. Grime and crime make for bad neighbors. And now, even the once pristine parts of our wonderful city are in the fight of their lives to stop a city plagued by crime, grime, corruption, and failing schools. From Fox 45 News, this is a Your Voice, Your Future Town Hall, the Save Our City Tour. Neighbors helping neighbors, council district by council district.
Good evening, I'm Mackenzie Frost. Tonight, the 7th installment of the Fox 45 Save Our City Town Hall Tour, where we go to each council district in Baltimore City and give you, the public, an opportunity to voice your concerns. We're here at the National Great Blacks and Wax Museum Mansion in East Baltimore. The museum gracious enough to host us tonight, but not endorsing the views expressed during our town hall by our panelists and our guests. Our focus tonight, Baltimore's 12th district, and more broadly, the serious issues facing Baltimore City schools. Tonight, our town hall panel includes several guests. We also invited both Mayor Brandon Scott and Councilman Robert Stokes, who represents the 12th district here and heads up the City Council's Education, Workforce, and Youth Committee. Both are refusing to participate in tonight's discussion. We also invited the Baltimore City Schools CEO, Dr. Sonia Santelises, and the entire School Board of Commissioners. They are also all refusing to attend. Now, tonight, I want to introduce our panelists. First, we have Reverend Dr. Andre Humphrey. He's the commanding chief of Baltimore's Trauma Response Team. Panelists, we also have Kelly Vaughn. Kelly is a 12th district resident, born and raised. She just launched her exploratory committee to run for city council. Tharu Vignaraja, familiar face, former Baltimore City mayoral candidate and product of the city school system. He's a former federal prosecutor and a deputy attorney general, and he says fixing the problems of the city starts with addressing education. Next up on our panel is Pastor Shannon Wright, former mayoral candidate and the leader of the Urban Engagement Initiative, which has said that they're threatening to sue the city school system if the school CEO, Dr. Santelises, is not removed. And finally, Dr. Christopher Metzler, a Baltimore City education advocate. Again, panelists, thank you so much for joining us here tonight. We have a lot to discuss. Let's dive right in. First, we also have to address, we just mentioned it in the opening, none of our city leaders are here tonight. And I want to go up and down the panelists before we really dive into the topics to get your thoughts on why. Why isn't the mayor here? Why isn't the city councilman, Dr. Robert Stokes, here? And none of the leaders from Baltimore City Schools, and we're less than a mile away from the city schools headquarters. They're not here tonight. Tharu, let's start with you. Why?
Look, I don't think it's an accident. I don't think they're too busy. I think it is a very deliberate, calculated political choice. They have decided that it's better to bury their heads and pretend these problems are not their problems than to come here and face the music, to face the people. They've decided that they can choose which journalists cover them, which questions to answer, instead of coming and hearing from the people and answering the people's questions. And for frankly, a long time in this city, that kind of strategy, that kind of political calculus has been rewarded. They get elected over and over again. But I think once and for all, we are seeing people emerge and saying enough is enough. We're not going to stand for this. We're going to run against them. We're going to start 3 years in advance to make sure that it's clear that they're going to face the music now and that we're not going to wait for an election cycle to make them answer these questions.
Kelly, let's go to you. You just launched your exploratory committee. You told me this yesterday and earlier this week. And why start now, and why do you think that these leaders are not here? Does it suggest something to you as a resident and a constituent of Robert Stokes that he's not here?
I was born and raised in this district. I was born and raised with some of the greatest leadership. However, Councilman Stokes has been in leadership or in public service for about 37 years, just about as old as I am. I am 37. And I believe that after a while, your hunger and your thirst to make changes in your community can die out. Maybe there needs to be a fire lit or ignited back in this community. And so that's one of the reasons why the leadership has not showed up tonight.
Dr. Humphrey, does it suggest anything to you that they're not here?
Well, I can't speak on why they're not here, but I can speak on to the fact that the community at large have to hold these elected officials accountable. And for so long, I also grew up in East Baltimore. For so long, people just have accepted what's been dished out to them, and so many people have been broken, have no hope. And some people have to be educated and to let them know that they do have a choice. And when people become powerless, I mean, they do have a voice. And sometimes when people feel like they're not held accountable, they can make the choice and say, I don't have to show up.
Dr. Humphrey, I want to come back to you later on this evening and to talk about hopelessness and the trauma and what that can lead to. But first, Dr. Metzler, do you think that it suggests anything that not only are the city leaders not here, but the city school leaders, the ones that we are talking about when we have Project Baltimore has uncovered so many problems and cracks within the system, and they're not here to talk about it and address any of these problems?
Well, yeah. I mean, look, this is what city leaders in this city care about. Corruption. They care very much about corruption. They care about power. This is a discussion about children. They don't care about the children in the city. And as others have said, the fact of the matter is, what is the incentive? If they are still being elected by the city of Baltimore residents over and over again, they have no reason to show up. They can say, I'm not going to be there. What are you going to do to me? Vote me out of office? Absolutely not. So until city residents do that, we will be here talking about this forever.
Pastor Wright, if they, like Dr. Metzler said, if they don't believe that they care about the children, what do these leaders care about?
Lining their IRAs and retirement funds, perhaps? I don't know. But certainly not the best interest of the children of the city. Look, when companies decide whether or not to move to a location, they look at potential employees. They look at the job pool. That comes from good education. We don't have that here. So the city leaders are cutting off their own economic nose to spite their face by not fixing the public education system. Decrease in population, jobs and companies leaving, property values falling, taxes going up. It's the wrong formula for success in Baltimore. The best way to fix the decline of the city is to fix the public schools. And that's done by heart, by caring, by spirit. People go where their priorities are. So the fact that they're not here, I can't say where they are, but I can say where they're not and where their interest is not. And that's with the children of Baltimore City.
Dr. Metzler, when we talk about the city school system, we hear the politicians often say the same platitudes over and over again, that they are invested, they want to see Baltimore back on the same track, but it doesn't seem like their actions match what they're saying, at least not on the campaign trail. And I've heard that from a lot of people who vote for them and then they see what they're doing and they get a little frustrated. What do you think is the agenda driving this action and this double standard between what politicians will say on the streets versus what they actually deliver once they get elected?
Well, so let's start with the superintendent, for example. She's Ivy League educated. Nothing against that, as am I. But here's the issue. The issue is she cannot relate to the students in the city of Baltimore. And for the Board of Education to indicate that they gave her a raise so some other system would not pick her up is simply a lie. Who would pick her up? This is one of the worst performing school districts in the country. She makes $20,000 a year, less than the chancellor of New York City schools. But so here's the thing. As a politician, what does she care? There is no incentive for her to care. And until people start taking action to hold them accountable on what they said on the campaign trail, this doesn't get fixed.
Should the CEO of the school system, not just Baltimore City Schools, but I guess any city, any public school district, should that leader be a politician?
They should not be, but they are. Every last one of them. As much as they say they're not, they are. I'm an educator just like she is an educator. The difference is I'm not the superintendent. And that's the issue we have here.
You mentioned relating to the students. Dr. Humphrey, I want to bring you into this conversation because a lot of the students come from difficult home life, and if they have a home life. Can you explain what your group and how you see the impacts of trauma showing up in everyday life?
Well, first of all, because trauma should be addressed as a mental health issue that's all over the world. And it also should be treated as a disease. And until people recognize this and put more funding into the school system and our children, I don't know about the education system from what I just heard on TV because I don't follow that. My concern is dealing with trauma and the impact that it's had on these children that's coming from broken homes. Don't have food, some of them don't have, and then you have a lot of homeless children that's on the street that has to defend for themselves. So in my 65 years, Baltimore have never seen a crisis like this in this city. And until the people, right now, they fed up, and sometimes you have to be sick and tired of being sick and tired. But we do have people in this city, such as clergy with Act Now Baltimore, that decide to do things and not sit on the back burner and wait for the city to give us a handout. I don't know if any of y'all ever walked in schools during the day. I mean, it's like a prison.
And let me just give a concrete example of what Dr. Humphrey sees every day when it comes to trauma in schools. A couple years ago, you may remember there was a murder right outside of Cherry Hill Elementary School. Now, they had renovated the whole building. The building looked superficially beautiful. But in the middle of the day, just as kids were getting out of elementary school, 2 people were shot and killed right outside. One of those young boys left that school and turned over the body of the person who'd been shot and killed because the police weren't there yet. All of those kids streamed out of school seeing blood and guts on the sidewalk outside their elementary school, and the next day they had to come back. They sent trauma specialists into that school. The students had never met the trauma specialist before. The trauma people were there for a couple of weeks, and then they were gone. And those kids will be haunted by that memory, by that becoming the normal occurrence in their schools for the rest of their lives. And Cherry Hill Elementary School, unfortunately, is not unique. Every school in Baltimore City has a story like that, which means every child in Baltimore City has endured a trauma like that.
And people in this city, I can't speak of other cities, but so many of our young people experience trauma on different levels that we want to know why the homicide rate is up. Is when you have a lot of angry young African-American children who feel unloved and have no safe haven, no places to go. The PAL centers, the recreation centers, all that's closed. Just last month on Greenmount Avenue and 24th Street, you had over 250 young kids just out because they thought they was going to a party, and there was nothing that the police could do because of the consent decree. So my question is, where were some of these parents? So anytime you have kids that's not thinking normal and think that it's okay to walk down the street with open containers and smoke marijuana and blow it in the police face, we got a big crisis on our hand. And if we don't address it, and it's to this point now that we're not even gonna be able to come out of our house because going in the system and not getting the treatment and the help that they need, if they don't get it in the schools and if they don't get it from home, where are they gonna get it from?
Kelly, I want to ask you this because, like we mentioned, you just launched your exploratory committee to run for city council. we've heard this before about rec centers being closed, and I know that's been a big issue. Do you think that the city council should do more to address the after school or the recreational and the youth programs in the city? We're seeing a 16-year-old boy got shot and killed just last week, and the younger Baltimoreans are becoming victims so frequently. Do you think that there's a role for city council here to step up and do more to address that?
I absolutely do. Without an outlet after school, children are left either bored with nothing to do, or they're left to migrate to those who are drug dealers in our community. And we have to fill up their day with things to do. I have children of my own. They have no haven to go to. There's a very dilapidated playground in the block of Aiken Street. And my church revitalized the playground. We went out, we cleaned it, we painted. The city did not help in that effort. And that is one of the places that children would be able to gather, but now it's become an open air drug market right in our community. And it's as if no one cares. Now our children have drug dealers to look up to. I came home in November of last year to a body at the foot of my steps. There was a homicide situation happening. The councilman did not come out that night. And this guy was one who did for the children. Yes, he was a drug dealer, but when they're left with that as an example, and that's the person who takes care of them and makes sure that they have what they need, we're steering them in the wrong direction, number one. And number two, we're creating a culture that in a few years, none of us are going to want to live in this district when our children have been raised by drug dealers and have been mentored by drug dealers. So absolutely, they should take steps to get our rec centers back where they need to be.
Pastor Ed, I want to ask you this question because when we talk about schools and education, we know the students in Baltimore City schools are struggling. We've all heard the statistics that we know from Project Baltimore uncovering the data about failing high school students and middle school students, 41% with a GPA of 1.0 or lower. What do you think would happen if every student in Baltimore City was able to not only graduate high school, but get an education from a university or an Ivy League school? What do you think that would do to the city?
I think it would change the trajectory of the city overnight. When you see children on the streets that aren't doing the things that they should be doing, they're learning things that they shouldn't be learning because they're in places where they shouldn't be. But if we had schools functioning in a manner that, and specifically, not just an open building with a teacher, but a community school format, so that you could educate the children, you could invite in the parents and the caregivers and be able to see where certain gaps are, not just in the school building, but in the homes as well, and really be able to uplift these children in these communities. So when you've got children that are graduating, they have hope. They have ideas for what they want to do, what they want to be, what they want to achieve. The parents have hope that their children's lives are going to be better than theirs were. And that's kind of what we all want. But in this city, it's not that. When you raise a child in this city, you have to hope that they survive high school, number one. You have to hope that they're able to get a diploma, and that diploma isn't weighted as it should be, which means it will not be valued as much as a diploma from another municipality. These kids are coming out of here, and the ones that do get diplomas, they don't even realize how far in the rabbit hole they are. The diplomas are not weighed the same. It does not have the same value to have a diploma from Baltimore City as it does anywhere outside of the city. And these children are constantly being set up for failure.
We know that we just learned about the investigation, the internal report at Augusta Fells. The ghost students, ghost classes, grade-changing schemes were happening. When it comes to the taxpayers' role in this, we know that state, federal, and local taxes fund Baltimore City public schools. We know that this investigation confirmed that ghost classes and ghost students were happening. When it comes to the level of criminality of this, as your role as a former prosecutor, do you think there's any sort of comparison between what's happening in city schools right now and, let's say, perhaps Medicaid fraud, when we know doctors and we know physicians do get charged and do get prosecuted and end up going to prison for such things? Is it the same?
There is clearly a parallel, and when the CEO of schools acknowledged that other agencies were involved, I think she signaled to the public that perhaps there were criminal repercussions that were afoot, and that makes sense. If you are a doctor and you forge and fabricate that you did a exam that you actually didn't do, that you had a patient that you didn't actually have, and you do it in order to get your clinic more money, that's called Medicaid fraud, and you get prosecuted by federal prosecutors for that. If teachers and administrators are conspiring, they're literally working together to cook the books, to make up numbers, to make up students so they get more money from the taxpayers, that's also criminal. And I think it's one of the circumstances of why folks aren't here, because who wants to defend that? I mean, the city council approved that budget. The mayor signed off on that budget. They have supervisory authority over the debacle, the tragedy that is unfolding on North Avenue, but they don't want to be up here and explain and answer that. You can see that reflected when they get a chance to do hearings. They ask silly questions. It's not that they're not good people, but they're complacent. It's not that they don't care. It's that they are comfortable with their position of pretending these problems are not their own, not showing up when it really matters, and then when election time comes along, getting enough donations to send out some mailers and take some commercials and hope that's enough to fend off a challenger.
I asked the state AG's office if they were investigating. They wouldn't confirm or deny any sort of investigation. So we don't know exactly, but we do know what the CEO said, and you were right about that. When it comes to the timeline about this, is there any sort of statute of limitations that would apply, or are they working under some sort of strict timeline here for that?
Yeah, look, the good news is that felonies in Maryland have no statute of limitation. So if they've committed a felony, there is no statute of limitation. And you want police and prosecutors, investigators and authorities to take the time they need to build a rock-solid case. As a former prosecutor, I think that's really important. But there also needs to be an acknowledgement from the CEO, from the folks, that this is happening, that this is actually underway. You know, we ask people on the streets all the time to come forward and cooperate with police, right? We always see our city leaders standing up and saying, we need the community to step up. Well, we need folks inside of these institutions to step as well. We need, if you're a teacher, if you're a principal, and you see incompetence or corruption, speak up. If you are a cop or a sergeant and you see incompetence or corruption, speak up. If you work in City Hall and you get paid a salary by the taxpayers, but you're watching your colleagues engage in incompetence and ineptitude, be the whistleblower that we ask our community to be, because that is something very concrete right now that the public can do, that our citizens can do to try to fight the tragedy that is unfolding.
That's why the city has an independent inspector general. She takes complaints and report, calls like that as well.
Absolutely.
Dr. Metzler, we just mentioned the hearing that happened in late September, chaired by Councilman Stokes. He told me that he wanted to have quarterly hearings after that. A couple of questions with that. One is, quarterly hearings, is that enough to really get any sort of answers out of city schools, especially when we continue to get stonewalled by these leaders when we ask questions?
Well, first of all, there were no questions that were asked. That's the first issue. This is a sideshow. It's a farce. You sit up there and have these conversations in which it is a love fest. People cannot even get the chance to participate. What that says to me is that Councilman Stokes and others on the city council are complicit in this behavior. This is the kind of stuff that we're talking about. And look, let's look at Baltimore City. Let's look at the declining populations. Let's look at the fact that the people who can pay taxes are moving out of the city in record numbers. So who do you have left? You have the very poor. You also have politicians, and you have developers. Developers in Baltimore City pay the politicians essentially to remain in office. And that is the situation that you have. At some point, are parents really ready to allow Baltimore City to be the ultimate welfare state? And that's the question they have to ask themselves.
Let me just remind everybody about this hearing for just a minute, Mackenzie. This is a hearing where they are supposed to be asking the CEO of schools about what's going on in the schools. You've got the highest rates of chronic absenteeism in the state. You've got some of the worst test scores in the nation. You've got lead paint so that you can't drink water from the water fountains. You have dozens of schools that don't have air conditioning or heat. And what do they ask about? They ask if there's soap in the bathroom. It is literally laughable. And look, you don't have to be a former prosecutor. You don't have to be a journalist to ask some hard-hitting questions. You do have to care. And if you don't care enough to ask those hard-hitting questions, then you're abdicating your responsibility to the public to stand up and fight for them.
Kelly, I want to ask you this really quickly because I asked Councilman Stokes why he didn't ask any of those questions after the hearing, and he told me that it wasn't his responsibility as chair to ask those questions. Is that acceptable?
Not for the EWY, no. That is one of his responsibilities, is to ask those questions, along with making sure that our youth programs go forth, which I don't know of any in our district that are still continued. It's his responsibility.
All right, thank you. Now we want to hear from you, the citizens. It's why we hold these town halls. We want to hear from you, the taxpayers, about Baltimore's issues and ideas for solutions. I'm joined by my Fox 45 News colleague, Keith Daniels, back talking to some people who are joining us tonight. Keith, what are you hearing from our audience as far as big issues and any questions for our panelists?
Well, Mackenzie, I saw this one man. He walked in, he had his clipboard, he had his pen, and he said he wanted to talk to people and sign them up to do good for the city. So I asked him, what organization are you with? He said, I'm not with an organization. I am a Baltimore City taxpayer, and he has questions, particularly about the school board. His name is Mr. Newton. Mr. Newton, what's your question for the panel?
My question is, I've heard the talk, I've seen the walk. I need to know what action we can now take. We need to take some type of legal action against City Hall and City Council people. We need to start a petition, an online petition, to have them either removed from office or to clearly let them know they will not be reelected come the next election.
You say you want to see some action. What's your question for the panel here?
What kind of action can we take within legal standards to get response from our city government?
Dr. Metzler, why don't you take that question?
Yeah, I'm so glad you asked the question. Very shortly, we will be taking legal action against the city. At this point, the lawsuit is ready and will be filed at any moment. Because, see, in the law, we know that there's discovery. We will discover those things that Councilman Stokes and others should have given us access to in the first place. So that is action number one. There'll be very exciting news coming out about that soon. Lawsuits ready to go, can be filed at any moment.
Dr. Metzler, I want to go back to the question really briefly because I want to ask the entire audience if you could raise your hand or clap if you would agree or support the idea of implementing some sort of charter amendment in Baltimore City to allow a recall process to move forward if you were unhappy with the way city leaders were doing their jobs. When it comes to a recall through, let me ask you this. What do you think that would spark any sort of concern or fire under elected leaders if they knew that they had the possibility of being recalled mid-term if their constituents were unhappy with their job performance?
You know, it's honestly hard to know. I think it's very possible that they would ignore a recall petition just like they ignore these forums. Truth is that 4 years ago, we'd never seen anything like this. We'd never seen the level of outrage. We'd never sensed the urgency that we feel, I think, in the people of Baltimore. We didn't have town halls going from one district to another. You didn't have people standing up and stepping up to run for office years in advance. There is something afoot in Baltimore because I think people have really had it. And this might be just the push that we needed. I mean, you hate to say that a city's got to hit rock bottom before it recovers itself, but we do feel like it is a moment where the people of Baltimore are showing up in droves. People are up here because they are frustrated and because they care. People are in the audience because they are frustrated and because they care. I'd like to believe that democracy has solutions for this. We can vote people out, but it does take the time to make sure that you're educated about the issues, educated about who shows up and who doesn't, educated about what they stand for, and then actually go and exercise your right to vote.
Pastor Ray, do you agree with the idea of a recall?
I do, but I think in addition to a recall, we also need to look at term limits. I think there are also some legislative options that we need to look at. We need to encourage all of our state legislators to introduce legislation for dissolution of the current school board and a completely elected school board, and also academic savings accounts so that the money follows the student. We need to introduce competition. Competition spurs business. So the school districts need to understand that if they can't do the job, then someone else will, and that money will go elsewhere. So when you go back to the GO students, for example, if there were 100 GO students, let's say you round down to $15,000 that comes into the city per student. If there were 100, that's $1.5 million every year. Conceivably, 4 years a student would be in school. That amount of money could put heat and air conditioning in how many schools? There are resources, there are needs in each one of these buildings, and not just to mention the buildings, but the resources that the teachers need that aren't getting into the classroom. This money, just in that one building, could turn around the physical plant of several schools. And if you were to actually take that to heart, the next thing that should happen is Dr. Santelices should say, you know what, this shows us there's a problem. And we're not going to try and pull a wool over your eyes and tell you it was just Augusta Fells. We're going to expand the investigation. We're going to look at the books in all the schools. She's not going to say that because she knows, as we already do, that it was not just Augusta Fells, that there is grade changing, that there are ghost students and ghost administrators in multiple schools in this city. So until a person who claims to be a leader wants to actually stand up and say, look, we do have some problems, but we can fix them together. We didn't get here overnight, and it's not going to be fixed overnight. But if we all work together, we can fix it. There's nothing short of that they can say that would be believable. This didn't just materialize today.
You brought up the state legislators. Mm-hmm. We also don't have any of them here. The state lawmakers, we know that they passed the Kerwin Plan, the education, the blueprint for Maryland's future during this last legislative session, the money starting next year. Dr. Metzler, do you think adding more money to the school system will solve these problems when we already know that Baltimore City spends approximately $18,000 per student?
No, I don't think that's good. The issue is not money. The issue is waste. The issue is fraud. The issue is corruption. That's the issue. You know, in many ways, remember the Catholic Church scandal. In the Catholic Church scandal, the church essentially said, okay, parents, everybody, we know what's going on. We'll pretend that it's not going on, and we're going to sacrifice a number of you every year. So is Baltimore City parents going to allow them to continue to sacrifice their students, their children, to a life of crime, from the classroom to prison? Is that what it's going to take? And that's the thing that we have to look at. Money is not the issue. The issue is a failure to work and administer taxpayers' dollars in an efficient way. It's scandalous.
If I could add, money coming into Baltimore City, again, as Dr. Metzler said, is not the problem. But when you start to look at the books of how many administrators at the Board of Education make over 6 figures a year, and you start to look at how many folks on the personnel roles at the schools actually work at the Board of Education and also make over 6 figures a year, it's not a matter of not having the money, it's not being a good steward of the money. So I'd like to say to anybody that professes faith in the city, that's watching and listening, we're all taught in Scripture to be good stewards. So I'd like to understand, if you see Dr. Santelices is not being a good steward, and you see Mayor Scott is not being a good steward, and you see the Board of Ed and the City Council are not being good stewards, what's wrong with you? Why haven't you checked your faith that you profess, that you are not holding them accountable? Because when you don't, you then become part of the problem. You that know better and aren't doing better are allowing this to continue.
Three, did you want to weigh in on that?
You know, on the money question, I want to agree with something that was just said, and I want to disagree with something. There are things that more money would help with. If we wanted to have a dedicated bus system so that kids didn't have to get on the public transport and go an hour and a half on 3 different things, that would be a worthwhile expenditure. And if the city council or the mayor came or the Dr. Santalese came and said, look, I need $20 million to make sure that every kid gets picked up at their home and taken to school because so much chronic absenteeism is because they have to use these public systems, that would be worth it. If they said we need after-school programs at every elementary school and before-school programs at every elementary school, that would be a purpose. But instead what they ask for is a blank check. They say, give us $200 million more with no questions asked and no strings attached. That is absurd. We spent, when you walk outside, you can take a look at it, $27 million on the renovations on North Avenue. There's some new bus lanes that are parked. There's some renovations that have been done to the curbs, which are really important. There's some new lampposts that are put up. But the notion that that cost $27 million is laughable. And nobody knows where that money went. We devoted $27 million to the North Avenue Rising project, and then we let them spend it however they want. And we do that with schools, we do that with DPW, we do that with the police department, and that's how you end up in the mess we're in.
Yeah, but here's the thing. You know, I agree with you fundamentally, except you're giving the money to the fox who's guarding the hen house. And that's the problem. So if you take that $20 million for the dedicated bus system, what's going to happen to it? The same thing that's happening currently. So yeah, I think it would do that, but you have to put it in the hands of good stewards, whether that is an outside board or something like that, because the current system, that money will disappear. There will be ghost students on the bus.
I agree with Dr. Metzler. And you know, one other thing that needs to be brought to mind here, our leaders show us who they are when they don't show up. Dr. Maya Angelou said, when somebody tells you who they are, believe them. So why would you continue to act as if they are different than they have shown you to be and continue to put your children's future in their hands by giving them the resources that are not translating to the children? If someone tells you who they are, believe them.
I want to be very clear. We do need new leaders. I think the point is that if a Miss Kelly Vaughn, if a Miss Claudia Tolles was in those positions and actually doing the work, the notion that there are additional purposes to which money is needed is absolutely true. That's true for DPW. That's true for a number of things. But if you have someone who is just sneaking money from the till, not paying any attention, asking questions about soap in the bathrooms instead of about kids in the classrooms, that's obviously a very different problem.
You mentioned, too, we're seeing, Kelly, you're launching your plan or possibility of running. We're seeing the same thing happening in Council District 1, where Zeke Cohen is. Claudia Tolles is looking at running as well. And Dr. Humphrey, I want to bring this back to you because you mentioned earlier that the city is, you feel like the city is seeing a level of crisis and trauma that it perhaps hasn't seen before. I guess my question is, how did we get here? What does that look like to you? And is this truly a pivot or a tipping point for the city?
Well, the reason why we're in the crisis that we're in is too many people turn a deaf ear. We know what the problems are. We need solutions. We spend too much time complaining about the situation. I can only speak about East Baltimore. I lived in West Baltimore for some years, but I grew up here in East Baltimore. And we were always able to fix our own problems. The Oliver Community Association was one of the most strongest organizations that I know of in East Baltimore. And we're going to see more of the killings. You're going to see more of the homicide rate going up. Is because the monies that needs to go into the mental health practice. I know that the mayor said that he's going to put money into mental health. There's a 911 call come. We call it 311.
The diversion plan.
Yes, the diversion plan. Thank you. But until we have people that are really, really concerned and have the compassion, police officers' hands are tied. And to get out of this problem, you know, we have to have more mental health crisis.
We've talked about this before, and I want to ask you about the 5-year plan from the mayor when it comes to his violence reduction plan. Do you think that what he's outlined is enough to really turn the city around and really do what he says it's supposed to do.
I read over the plan. I looked at the plan. But until you get the impact, I know they say they talk to a lot of the community people, but you have a lot of community organizations in this entire city that's doing great work. And if this money was given to some of these grassroots organizations that's working in silos, you would see a better effect in this city. That will happen overnight. Because you take myself, I don't sleep much. And when people call me to respond to a crisis, I'm there. Most of the shootings and homicides in the city, especially dealing with young children, Mackenzie Elliott, Taylor Hayes, I can go down the list. We can't take children home nowadays and tell the parents that your child has done something wrong. You might get beat up. So until we change the mindset of the people in this city, stop complaining and do what you can do. Be the change that you want to see. And once we do that, I'm not concerned about, I am concerned about why they're not here, but I don't put my faith in politicians. My faith is in God. So, and speaking of that, this world is in the situation that it's in because people have turned their backs on God. We're not going to turn it into a religious platform, but as a pastor, I have to say it. And in 2 Chronicles 7:14, he said, if my people, which are called by my name, shall humble themselves and turn from their wicked ways, then he will heal the land. And until we do that and stay focused, if you don't want to see trash in your community, stop putting it out there. Yeah. You know, don't look for the city leaders to do what we can do.
Dr. Humphrey, thank you. I want to go back to Keith now. Keith, I understand you're talking to more people. They have more questions. Tell us what you have, who you have, and their concern.
Well, right. Well, Mackenzie, as you know, we've seen this growing number of young people and children, teens, as perpetrators and victims of gun violence in the city. And Charlene Bourne, she lives here in East Baltimore. She's concerned about crime, particularly about crime and children. What's your question, though, Charlene, to the panel about that issue?
My question is, what are we going to do about our young black men? There's nothing for them to do. There's no one coming out with any job resources, how they can get their ID, how they can get their birth certificates.
Do you see that as part of what's fueling the violence?
Yes, because of idle mind. They have nothing to do. They're just standing on the corners, drinking, smoking weed. It's nothing being done to help them.
So your question to the panel again, please.
What can we do together to get help for our young black men?
Thank you, Ms. Bourne.
I worked in the Department of Juvenile Services for 20 years. Charles Hickey School, Cheltenham, Victor Cullum. And I also wrote a book called Black Youth in the Juvenile Justice System. Until you can change the attitudes of our young men, if you change the attitude, you can change their behavior. When a young man feels like he has no worth or he have no hope, and we have people constantly putting them down, the young people this, the young people that. I used to tell people, educate, don't incarcerate. Now, I'm not talking about don't put killers in jail, but until we hold our elected officials, there's a big mama in every community. Open these PAL centers back up. You know, give them the trades. I mean, a lot of people don't talk about trades. Give them, if they may not get it academically, but I'm saying give them hope. To answer Ms. Charlene's question, to give them hope, and she see it on a first-hand basis. Not only does she live in that neighborhood, I used to live in that neighborhood, I own property in that neighborhood. They watch us, they emulate us. So I'm saying if you're not who you say you are, they're not going to respect you. But if you don't pass judgment on them and you reach out to them, you'd be surprised. They want, a lot of these guys that's on the corner don't want to be on the corner. A lot of these normal people don't go around shooting people and killing people. So I'm saying until we get in the mindset, they're going to prison younger and younger. I used to go down to the morgue and see the faces of young people blown off, the back of their heads blown off. And I'm saying, yeah, mama want to say, every mother think their child is a good child. But until we can't say let's go back how it was in the 60s. We living in a different area of time. But we need to hold the politicians accountable for the funding for our young people. I mean, I've seen a decline with the squeegee kids, but I'm saying we need to do more. And we can do more. But if you don't hold them accountable, I want to say this to the panel, to the audience. I'm sure some of us would love to not go to work and get paid. I don't understand how people can be in political office and don't do their job and people don't hold them accountable. I don't understand that.
Kelly, I wanted to get your take on this as well because, again, going back to Councilman Stokes, not getting paid to do their job, he says he won't ask these questions. It's not his role. If it's not his role, what is his role?
It's definitely his role. He is the chair of the committee that handles what we're talking about. We're talking about youth not being engaged. His committee is supposed to handle workforce. I've been in other districts. I've seen the trailers that come out and they park and they deal with the community and they develop skills within the community. They will park it there. They'll be there all week. And by the end of the week, people walk away with jobs. That has not happened here. And because we are revitalizing North Avenue, which I just want to put this out there, traffic is horrible now that they've added this bus lane. But if we're going to revitalize that and we're going to make it this great, beautiful epicenter of business, why not host a workforce event there where they are doing open air drug sales right here on North Avenue, on the side streets from North Avenue. North Avenue has a lot of one-way streets that are tiny and they are great for drug dealers to be on. I have not seen the councilman walk down those one-ways. When I see him, he's on North Avenue, where it's beautiful and sweet. Since they've revitalized North Avenue, by the way, nobody is taking care of the greenery, the shrubbery, or anything. So it was done for one moment, to look great for one moment, and the people that live here are left with the responsibility to prune these things. We have to revitalize this entire district for our children. If they are growing up in it now, the way that it is, they're going to believe that that's how it's supposed to be because that's what they grew up in. And so it is his responsibility, absolutely, in addition to taking care of our seniors. Our seniors have not been addressed during the pandemic from our councilmen. The churches have done it. The schools have done it, but not our councilmen.
Let me ask this. Speaking of North Avenue, I have a question for every member of the panelists. I want to go up and down and get your take, each one of you. We're on North Avenue right now. It's dark outside. We know that this area has a history of open-air drug markets. Pastor Wright, I want to start with you. The question is, would you feel safe going outside right now and walking around going down North Avenue? And if not, is that acceptable?
So, the spiritual answer is yes, because my God protects me no matter where I go. The real answer is, so does my permit to carry.
Every time. Every time.
You got to decide when you live in Baltimore, do you want to roll the dice that the police will get there before somebody's bullet? We should not have to live that way. We should not have to have those concerns. But man's law and the Bible says you can do what you need to do if you do it the right way.
Dr. Metzler?
No and no. But here's the thing, though. We talk frequently about young black men as drug dealers. Here is an opportunity that the education system has missed. Drug dealers know how to count money. They know how to conduct business. They know how to act like business people. But the fact is, we've never taken an opportunity to give an alternative. We haven't given an alternative because of the school system and everything else. That is an entire lost generation and upcoming generations where, were they being better educated, they could own so much more of the property that's in the Inner Harbor and beyond.
And this is a part of a culture of low expectations that we've allowed everywhere.
Yeah.
We know that the danger is everywhere. We know that there's open-air drug dealing everywhere, and we've tolerated it. We've decided that it's okay on Edmondson Village Shopping Center to have kids and have adults selling drugs from morning until night in plain sight of cops, in plain sight of cameras, and we do nothing about it. And so the children there, the parents there, learn that that's what's expected, that that is okay, that in this city, that's not going to be tolerated. But it's not just about the drugs. We raised the concern about Edmondson Village in the last couple of days, and a mother reached out to me. Her son-in-law was killed at the Advanced Auto Parts just last year. He was gunned down in broad daylight with everyone to see, witnesses everywhere, and the case has gone nowhere. The cops have not reached out to her. The state's attorneys have not reached out to her. Her case is cold. And that is a moment where a family has been left with no justice. His name was Mr. Boyd. He was 46 years old. And I promise you that no one over there remembers his case because there's been hundreds of other murders since then, dozens of other children killed since then, and we do nothing.
Would you feel safe walking down North Avenue?
Look, I love this city, and I like to believe that I feel safe everywhere. I really, really do. I walk those side streets. I walk the main streets. I think it's important to be aware of what's going on there, and I think you can do it. But God, I would not let my mom walk down there. I would not let my dad walk down there. In their 80s, without a permit, I don't think they're going to walk down those streets and feel the way that we are entitled to feel on those streets.
Kelly?
I don't have the luxury of feeling unsafe when I walk down North Avenue. I'm a daughter of this district. And so when I walk down North Avenue and the other side streets, people know me. And they know what I will allow in front of me and what I won't. And so when I come around the drug dealers, they know to move. They know to pick up the trash from in front of my house because I'm a daughter of this district. And I'm respected throughout this community because I'm constantly in this community serving our people the best way that I can, whether it's food giveaways, clothing giveaways. And once the community sees that someone cares enough to provide for their grandmother who lives in Landvale Towers and is trying to just make it to the first of the month when her food stamps renews, because she's already not getting enough food stamps to make it through the entire month, then when they see that you're there and you're going to work with them and for them, then they are called into a posture of respect. So no, I feel absolutely safe in my neighborhood. District 12 will not go down as something that is violent and something that people cannot thrive in. The community has to come together. If we all come together and we all make changes, we can change this, we can turn this around, but I'm not gonna ever not feel safe walking in this community.
Dr. Humphrey.
Well, I feel safe anywhere I go. But I do know that God give us common sense. He didn't give us a spirit of fear, but power and love and a sound mind. Now, he gave me common sense. And there's some places in this city that I know that if I don't get out at a certain time, I don't worry about that because where I grew up, and plus, I grew up in Lafayette Projects. And once you engage with people and people know what your purpose is and what you stand for, there's a lot of young kids that grew up in the system who's adults now. And there's some of them not doing the right thing. But to answer your question, I'm going to be cautious, but I feel safe anywhere I go.
I want to go back to the open-air drug markets quickly because I know that there seems to be, it appears that there is a disconnect or a lack of coordination and communication between the city state's attorney, Marilyn Mosby, and the Baltimore Police Department. Mosby says that her office no longer prosecuting drug possession charges and that the police should continue to make arrests for possession charges, but we're not really seeing that happen. Is that a lack of leadership, coordination, and should the people be left to wait until the leaders figure it out?
I mean, it's all of the above. It's a lack of coordination and communication. I don't think anybody knows what the rules are anymore. Can anyone tell me whether you can get locked up for drug dealing or not right now? Is anyone being arrested for drug dealing right now? The police commissioner says one thing, the mayor says another. The state's attorney says one thing, the council says another. They're too busy jockeying for position, trying to finger point, trying to figure out if there's a way to blame the other person for what's unfolding, that they don't want to get on the same page. It should not be hard for police and prosecutors to say, here is what we are going to do about open-air drug dealing on North Avenue on Edmondson Village. We're going to send in undercover cops to make sure that these arrests are actually happening. We're going to collect video from these gas stations that have one transaction after another. Your cameras caught it in the middle of the daylight because you happen to be there. Those cameras are catching it 24 hours a day, and they're giving it to the cops, they're giving it to the prosecutors, and then nothing is happening. That sends a very clear message to the criminals that there are no consequences for their conduct, and it sends a very clear message to the community that they just don't care.
When it comes to that message that's being sent, we've seen the sideshows or these street racing cars. We saw it along Key Highway. We know it's happening in other areas of the Baltimore City too. Do you think, I see a lot of heads shaking and nodding here, do you think that the City State's Attorney Marilyn Mosby's policies and this lack of communication or clear communication about what they are, does that contribute to some of this lawlessness activity that we're seeing across the city?
Absolutely. Yeah. It absolutely does. And look, from the standpoint of Marilyn Mosby and her policies, you know, the fact of the matter is she is more concerned about all the scandals surrounding her and being reelected into office. So she's not doing anything that even remotely resembles prosecution. And so, yes, there is a lack of communication. In my view, that lack of communication is on purpose. It is on purpose so that they all then will know it's not me, it's you, and then they end up getting reelected again. So that's the problem you have.
By design?
By design.
It's a double standard, and if any citizen was to break the law, they would go to jail. So if they break the law, they should go to jail. Yeah. So, I mean, until you change the laws in Annapolis, in the judicial system, it's sending mixed messages. Because I witnessed it, Theroux witnessed it. You're talking about elementary school kids walking down the street, smoking marijuana, blowing it in the police face. Open containers. So nothing we can do. We have to be able to do something. If that's the case, then it's going to be like the Wild Wild West days.
Dr. Humphrey, that's the perfect place to end. Time has evaded us, and thank you all so much for joining us. Thank you to everyone who graciously came out to see us and participate, and thank you to our hosts for letting us stay here. We'll continue to host these town halls, and we'll see you at our next one. Thanks for joining us.
Thank you.
I'm Dan Miller.
I'm Kevin Stern. At Miller Stern Lawyers, we are honored to serve the community that we love. We work for you.
For over a decade, we've spent our days and nights fighting for you. We believe in justice. We believe in fighting for what's right.
That's why we are proud to sponsor a community conversation to make a better Baltimore.
It takes guts to stand up for justice and accountability and demand better.
And we can do it by giving you a voice in your future.
At Miller Stern, we're fighting for a better Baltimore.